起きて。たくまってば。
You wake up in a familiar yet eerily unfamiliar place, encountered by strange animals, monsters even. Of course, you're frightened at first, but fortunately they can talk and insist they've been waiting for you for what feels like forever and are only here to help. After proving themselves on multiple occasions, saving you from what could have been death, there's no reason for you not to believe them. You quickly come to the conclusion that you aren't home anymore. There are just too many differences to ignore. A place like this simply would not be possible in the real world. So you and some others that woke up in this world with you endeavor to make it back home. But that isn't as simple of a task as you first thought. Soon you'll come to learn that not a lot of these monsters are as kind as the ones who first found you. And these monsters will progressively get bigger and stronger, wiser and more cunning, for better or for worse. You didn't wake up in the fantasy RPG of your dreams. You're fighting tooth and nail just to survive, and not all of you will. You'll be left to stare your own helpless mortality in the face, and you'll have to learn to live with the daunting consequences of your actions. This is the world of Digimon Survive. Digimon, the well-known Pokemon ripoff that took the world by storm. Nah, I'm just kidding. We all know Digimon's actually a Tamagotchi ripoff. Well, whatever you know Digimon as, it probably isn't quite like this. Digimon Survive is a 75% visual novel, 25% mediocre Fire Emblem ripoff set in a completely different world not tied to any other Digimon media. So, even if you know literally nothing about Digimon as a franchise, you can still jump right into this game and enjoy it just as much as anyone else. There is literally no barrier to entry here, unless, of course, you can't read. If you do know a thing or two about Digimon though, you might know a little about the absolute development hell this game went through. The TLDR of it is, it was revealed back in 2018 with a set release for 2019. This never happened, it came and gone, there was not really much spoken about it. It was almost forgotten about by Bandai and literally everyone working on the game. There are a few breadcrumbs dropped here and there, but realistically, every single time the game was mentioned, it was just to say that it was going to be further delayed with no real set release date. That was until April of 2022, when the release date of the 28th of July was finally set and delivered upon. And if you haven't guessed it already, this absolute development hell is one of the many horrors of Digimon Survive. Nah, I'm just pulling your leg. Look how much video is left down here. We are going to talk all about this game. I can't stress this enough though. If you are thinking of purchasing Digimon Survive, know that it is a visual novel first and foremost. So the main focus is going to be on the story, and you're gonna be in for a lot of reading. If you aren't down for that, well, it's a good thing you stumbled across this video. Save yourself some time and money and experience the horrors of this game vicariously through me and my botched editing. The game opens up with an eerie sight right from the get-go, with two kids frantically running from a dark shadow trying to consume them. Even the monsters they have by their side aren't enough to protect them. In an attempt to save the young boy, the young girl distracts the monster and ends up being pulled into this dark void by an ungodly amount of hands, while the young boy falls into a portal of some sort and our intro is over. We jump into the prologue and get a full anime sequence to introduce us to all of our key characters, which I really appreciate. It looks amazing, it sets the scene, it gives us some context for the story we're about to follow, it gives us a bit of subtle foreshadowing, and even helps us learn about and start to become a bit attached to our cast right from the start, as there's only so much emotion you can portray through dialogue and still frames alone. And if it wasn't obvious enough already, our protagonist is going to be Takuma, the kid wearing the goggles, because this is a Digimon game after all. Our story starts out on a school excursion of sorts, but there's a bunch of people from different schools and different year groups, so no one really knows each other well at all. Aoi and Minoru are the first two we're introduced to, and are the ones we've spent most of our time so far at camp with. Oh, and before it gets confusing, I figured I'd mention that I'm going to be referring to Takuma as us or myself throughout this video, because while he is his own character and I will address him as such at some points, for the most part he acts as our vessel to experience the story through, and the choices that we make as him dictate the way the story goes. In Digimon Survive, the choices you make can genuinely make an impact on the story, and it's not just the dialogue choices either. Everything you do can have some impact on the story and the overall way you experience the game. Whether that be the areas you search, the order in which you search them, the answers you give to characters you talk with, the order in which you talk to characters, and even which characters you choose to talk to with the limited time slots you have. It can all impact the story, which is honestly really damn cool, and why I would recommend you jump into this game blind. Because once you look up the guides and find out how the mechanics behind your choices work, if you're anything like me, you'll then try to optimize all of the choices you make and who you talk to at certain times, and that just kind of ruins the experience and defeats the purpose of it. Because naturally, would you have went out of your way to talk to X character at that certain time if you didn't know it would make Y outcome happen? No, you probably wouldn't have. So I can't stress this enough. Ignorance is truly bliss with this game. Our group heads to a historic landmark for today's main activity. To get there, we jump through a classic anime scene, walking by the river lined by cherry blossom trees. This whole scene looks kind of familiar though. You signed up for a Digimon game and suddenly you're on a date with Adam Sandler. Yep, alright. Enough jokes. We get introduced to two more of our main cast, Saki and Ryo, but unfortunately, on the way to this historic landmark, our path is blocked off by one of the many landslides we've seen reported on the news. But why does let the fun end here? After all, we are a bunch of teenagers on a school excursion. So what else would we do other than wander off the beaten path for shits and gigs? We overhear Saki and Ryo talking with a little girl named Mew, who tells them she can lead them to some secret shrine only known by the locals. Shrine dedicated to the gods known as Kemonogami. Sounds interesting enough, so naturally we tail them. But lose sight of them around an abandoned tunnel entrance. Here, we get our first one-on-one interaction with Shuji, one of the senior kids on the school excursion responsible for everyone, who isn't exactly happy about a bunch of kids wandering off. But before he can really scold us, we're interrupted by another kid who isn't a part of the trip but is another local. His name's Kaito and he's looking for his little sister, which of course happens to be the little girl Mew from earlier. And the way he describes her as tiny animal needing protection will become quite important later on. Seemingly out of nowhere, it starts snowing, which is really odd considering it's spring. This snow quickly builds up into a blizzard and we are forced into the abandoned tunnel for shelter. Considering that is the way Ryo, Saki and Mew must have went, we decide to follow that tunnel out until its exit, emerging out the other side to sunshine and a field full of red spider lilies that only bloom in autumn. We don't really have time to worry about that right now though. We did come here to find our friends after all. So we press on and make our way to the shrine. It looks eerie and clearly abandoned. Kaito remarks on how the locals really try to discourage people from heading over there, as there's an old legend of kids being spirited away, never to be seen again. Minoru, off taking some pictures as you do, notices a weird disturbance in his cell phone's camera. We check it out and can see it too. It looks like a dark looming shadow, but only exists in our camera. When we put the phone down, it's suddenly gone. Before we have time to look into this any further, Minoru calls us over to a cave entrance is found right underneath the shrine. Thinking we might find the others, we head inside. Unfortunately, we don't find them, but what we do find is some crazy looking murals, as well as an older man surveying the area. He tells us he's there to do research on the ancient Kemonogami faith, which the shrine we're at is connected to. This professor tells us that children were once sacrificed to the beast god as a way to ensure good harvest or prevent natural disasters, for example. But supposedly they weren't killed, they were just sent away, which really feeds into the whole spirited away myth. He's also translated part of the text on the cave wall, which translates to Agumon. Obviously this means nothing to any of them though. Suddenly we hear screams coming from back outside near the shrine, and when we get there we find Ryo and Saki being attacked by what looks like a weird moving statue. The professor assumes this might be one of those legendary Kemonogami. Soon enough, we are surrounded by a crap ton of these monsters, an earthquake hits, and if that wasn't bad enough, the ground underneath us collapses. This is where our story truly begins. We wake up and our surroundings look familiar yet eerily unfamiliar. Our phone doesn't work, we have no service, and we can't find our friends anywhere. But something finds us. It's another monster, but this one's a lot more soft around the edges and talks to us. Its name is Koromon and insists it's been waiting for you for what feels like forever. Although it's not quite sure why. We kind of run away from it as most people would, but get cornered by one of those rock monsters again. Koromon jumps in to try and help us, but is way too weak to even do anything. So we jump back into the fray to try and help the little guy. Moved by our act of kindness and wanting to prove the point that it is here to help, Koromon evolves into Agumon. This is where I first discovered that the term Digivolve will never be used in this game, because this entire game is in Japanese with English text. Digivolve was never actually a term used in the original Digimon anime, in Japan that is. It was just a weird translation that the English dub used and continued to roll with. I have been lied to my entire life, and I am kind of embarrassed to say this is the way I learnt about that. The bond Takuma and Koromon shared influenced this evolution. Koromon responded to his feelings, and that is the key with Digimon, or Kemonogami as they're known in this timeline. The bond they have with humans can influence their power, and the emotional response they get from their partners will dictate their evolution, for better or for worse. Now, we get our first taste of the combat mechanics of this game, and let me just get this out of the way quickly. They're okay at best. To lay it out for you, they're basically a simplified turn-based RPG. So think a really bare bones Fire Emblem with a bit more basic gameplay, smaller scales, and kind of worse maps. The difficulty is pretty much non-existent, especially if you're a completionist like me and take on each and every fight that comes your way, making all of your Digimon extremely over-leveled, sweeping every single battle. I did that and took on every single side battle because I was afraid that I would miss something. But take it from me, you can skip a vast majority of the wild encounters in this game and you won't miss a single thing. Obviously, the more battles you skip, the harder the boss battles then become, and the less chance you have to recruit the rarer Digimon you'd find on your journey. But overall, this game's strong suit isn't the battles anyway. And I really wouldn't dictate my experience of this game based on that battle mechanic, because it's pretty basic, a little boring, and 9 out of 10 times you'd probably just want to skip the battles anyway so you can continue on with the story. Like I said earlier, this game is a visual novel first and foremost. So I really hope you weren't expecting some groundbreaking battle system that would knock your socks off. They're not necessarily unfun, but I can't lie to you, they do start to get tedious, like, I don't know, halfway through the game. There is a certain cool novelty of seeing your partner Digimon evolve on the battlefield, getting to use their cool new moves, and I mean, even the art style and animations do look pretty good, but nothing, and I mean nothing, will piss me off more than when I went into a battle with mons that had low tier movement and the enemy Meramon or that god-forsaken bird fuck Beermon decide to just run away from me every damn turn and waste my fucking time. So yeah, that will be all I have to say about the battles. Slowly, we start to find the others. First off with Minoru and Aoi, who are back at the shrine, protected by their new partners, Falcomon and Labramon. Then our next idea is to, well, head back to the school, as we'd guess that's where everyone else would go to regroup. But once we get there, it doesn't look quite right at all. And weirdly enough, we didn't even have to trail back through that creepy tunnel to get here. The school looks old and overgrown and run down, and strangely enough, nobody's there. No other school kids, teachers, or life at all. And judging by their clocks on their phone, it's only been an hour since they passed out in that earthquake. So they start to speculate. Was there some crazy natural disaster? A nuclear fallout maybe? I mean, it does sound dumb, but when you really think about it, 50,000 people used to live here. Now it's a ghost town. The fact that it is all overgrown is a pretty big hint that it is none of these options though, because that would have had to happen over an extended period of time. Regardless, it's getting dark, so we take shelter in this abandoned school. Unfortunately enough, it looks like Ryo had a similar idea, as we find him freaking out in one of the upstairs rooms, thinking he's seen a ghost, and accompanied by his not so welcome partner Kunemon. He is a big bug and can't really speak like the others can, so I do get why you'd be a little bit fearful of it. In the blink of an eye, the whole school is covered in cobwebs. Or we're only just now noticing these cobwebs as our phone camera picked it up and revealed the illusion we were seeing before. It becomes pretty clear pretty quick we've fallen into some sort of trap and Aoi's gone. So our top priority right now is find her. So we go into an exploration mode to look around the school. Exploration happens pretty frequently throughout Digimon Survive and is a pretty fun part of the game, because this is where you can start to make a lot more choices, and the choices you make are the ones that will genuinely impact the story. In this exploration, for example, you can go through multiple parts of the school, like the gym, classrooms, hallways, etc. And all of these are interactive areas in and of themselves, some of which have items that are just packed with flavor text, all meant for world building, like how when you're in the kitchen, you can click on some pots and pans and Takuma will, think a line of dialogue to himself. But other things can actually matter. Firstly, you can whip out your cell phone camera and find distortions in the world similar to like you saw earlier. These distortions can be a couple of different things, like for example, useful battle items, mysterious dark shadows, which are the enemy encounters, or even perceived memories. These are weird, detailed stories that you unlock throughout the game. They're a bit of side content, but they're really interesting for more world building. They don't exactly affect the story, but it's cool to see nonetheless. They also start to help you piece together the puzzle of what's actually going on in this story before Takuma and the gang eventually, figure it out. The game also really encourages backtracking. For example, I found vinegar in the cafeteria, and Takuma just remarks on how there's no need for that, so why pick it up? But lo and behold, we find a use for it in the classroom when we try to get something out of reach, but it's stuck in a sticky drawer. Ryo tells us his mum used to use vinegar to clean up any sort of weird sticky substance, and, bada bing bada boom, Bob's your uncle, we grab the vinegar, go back to the classroom, get a secret item, which is the spirit lamp. Completely optional, but will come in handy later. As we continue to explore, we get a glimpse of the ghost Ryo was talking about, which is honestly a horrifying image in and of itself. We end up stumbling across two kids we've never seen before in the music room. Their names are Haru and Miyuki, and they are a spitting image of the kids we saw in the flashback at the beginning of the game. Haru warns us of a spider monster that has taken over the school and gives us a grim sense of hope, saying that it doesn't kill its prey straight away, it likes to store them and wait for them to slowly die. And that isn't exactly a fate we want for our friend now, is it? We learn the spider's secret den is in the gym, as well as find a secret passage to get there. And once we do, we encounter our first champion Digimon, but we just aren't ready and are quickly overpowered by it. We can even see Aoi just in the distance, but we aren't strong enough to do anything. So in an act of desperation, or I guess you could call it Takuma's determination, Agumon responds and evolves once more. This time, what he evolves into will depend on the choices you've made thus far. In Digimon Survive, there are three main karma affinities Takuma can have: Harmony, Wrath, and Moral. and which way he leans depends on the choices you make throughout the game. This is kind of why I was saying ignorance is truly bliss at the start, because until a little bit over halfway through the game, I had no idea how to impact these stats. I know it was coming down to my choices, but I didn't necessarily know how it worked and tracked. At many frequent points throughout the game, you are given 3 dialogue options, with the left being your moral option, the middle being your wrathful option, and the right hand side being your harmonious action. This might have been explained at the beginning in some tutorial, but I didn't notice, and I went and looked back on some footage and I still couldn't find where it might have been, but I was rushing through, I guess. Nonetheless, it wasn't until about halfway through the game I noticed if you hold your cursor over the choice you want to make for long enough, it starts to change color. It would turn red for your moral choice, yellow for your wrathful choice, and green for your harmonious choice. So then, at every given moment when you're given a 3-choice option, you could see which way you were going to lean depending on which option you chose. And that almost ruined the immersion for me personally, because now I knew if I really wanted a certain evolution for Agumon or to go down a certain route, I'd more consciously pick, for example, the moral option, even if that wasn't the option I was going to pick in the first place, had I not known how the mechanics worked. Does that make sense? Like, it's great for secondary playthroughs where you want to experience the other routes and can just speedrun your way through, but it is a bit of a shame that the game kind of just tells you how it works. Nonetheless, in my case, Agumon evolved into Tyrannomon, with Greymon and Tuskmon being the alternative options. We defeat Dokugamon, ridding the school of the cobwebs it produced, and save Aoi. And that is the end of Chapter 1. This game has 12 chapters, with the last 4 chapters dramatically changing whether you go through the moral, harmonious, or wrathful route. There is also one final true ending which you can't even obtain on your first playthrough. If I were to go through and recap and explain this story chapter by chapter, this video A would be like 10 hours long, and B become extremely boring for you to watch. And I hope I haven't bored you already. Like, hey, still awake? I know people like genuinely sleep to long form videos, so that's you, hey. Wake up! We're gonna carry on, picking up the pace a bit and focusing on the horrors of this story. Because, well, that's the fun part and what we're all here for. We cut to a scene of Shuji, Saki, and the professor, who are getting jumped by more of these rock monsters. Presumably, the professor sacrifices himself so the other two can get away. Back to our main group, and we come to the conclusion that we've got to get out there and search for our remaining friend. Making our way back to the shrine, we find the professor laying there, getting beaten up by a group of Gazamon. We beat him up, save the professor, and continue our search, which leads us to a nearby dam where we finally find Saki and Shuji, accompanied by Floramon and Lopmon, who are being cornered right now by Fangmon. We try to help, and the professor just can't catch a break, being thrown off the side of the dam. Everyone appropriately freaks the fuck out and freezes up. We manage to fend off Fangmon, but he isn't down for the count, so he runs off. We head down the dam to the riverbed with the slight hope that the professor might be down there and have survived, but we don't find him there. Instead, we find Fangmon, drenched in a black fog, begging and screaming until it pulls him in. And I've got to give props to the voice acting for this game overall. It is absolutely fantastic, and yes, it is only in Japanese, but I've got no problem with that. I mean, it's like watching any other sub-anime. The voice acting just has so much emotion to it. I can't think of a single dry character in this entire game. And Fangmon screams as he gets dragged down into the abyss is just something else. It's amazing. While I'm on the topic, I might as well quickly mention the music as well, which is just so fitting for each and every scene. It is a great soundtrack that hopefully I can use in this video without getting copyright strike. There are happier and more mellow tunes here and there, but when shit goes down, the mood is set. So hats off to the composers, they did a fantastic job. And now we've got taste of what this looming fog can actually do to us. It's brutal and everyone is, well, in shock. Cut into a perspective we haven't seen yet, we find Kaito and Miu bickering before what feels like an earthquake hits. Kaito goes to investigate and sees a giant monster with towering arms of pure muscle that look like they could tear you apart just walking past. He frantically goes back to find Mew to get them out of there, and she's gone. Back with our main group, there's some internal conflict on what to do next, as now a brutal death is on the cards. But ultimately it's decided we've got to go out and explore our surroundings. I mean, how else are we actually going to get out of here? But that decision won't come without its sacrifices. We venture out and emerge through a clearing opening up to a mountain pass, where we end up finding Kaito and his partner Drakemon arguing with some woman we've just never seen before. He's accusing her of being a monster in disguise, which, to be fair, is a pretty outlandish claim all things considered. And I mean, Ryo seems to really like her. But is it really out of the realm of possibility? We don't exactly have any proof though. And this woman offers to help guide us to a radio tower in the area, which will hopefully give our phones some service so we can call for help. I mean, let's be real, right? She's clearly fucking sus. But this is a group of kids who are clearly out of their depth that just need any help they can get. So they take it. I mean, most of them do. Kaito understandably doesn't trust this chick at all, so decides to run off to go find Mew on his own. And Takuma chases after him to make sure he's alright, while the rest of the gang head to the radio tower with the random woman, which is easily the biggest mistake they've made so far. As if they were never taught about strange danger. The gang, minus Takuma and Kaito, end up on an old cable car, which somehow still has active power and will take them straight to the radio tower. Seems straightforward enough, until it dawns on them that this was all a trap. And they're now stuck, suspended however many goddamn meters in the air, with the demon spider woman, Arukenimon. And her introduction, man, like, yeah, most players probably could have seen this coming, but the combination of the lighting, the soundtrack, the way she's just standing there cast in shadow with that creepy ass smile and beating eyes staring right into your soul is just unsettling. And her voice to top it off, it's just fantastic. It really just gives me Diaboromon vibes, and I'm all here for it. Takuma and Kaito see the cable car suspended in the air covered in webs, so they quickly rush in to try and save their friends, which is when we learn Arukenimon's real motive. She serves the master and believes us appearing in this world is the reason it's currently falling apart. And by sacrificing human children, it can be saved. We manage to knock her down a peg, save our friends, and she immediately pisses off. Finally, we reach the top of the radio tower to get a bearing of our surroundings and find maybe some glimpse of hope to get out of here. But seeing that view from the top is when it dawns on everyone that nobody is coming to save us, and that we clearly aren't in our own world anymore. There is water as far as the eye can see, so clearly we're on an island of some sort, which would just be impossible if we were still back in the real world. Ryo freaks out as if he wasn't already on the edge to begin with, and just runs as fast and far as he can before he ends up on a bridge between the mountain ranges. And he's completely lost it, screaming for his mother to come and save him. Cyclomon, the massive monster Kaito saw earlier, corners him on the bridge and tries to throw him off. And Ryo screams that there's something else. The gang shows up to try and help Ryo, but halfway through the battle, him and Haru end up falling off the bridge. We wrap things up with Cyclomon as fast as we can and head straight down there. But before we get there, we switch to Ryo's perspective. He survived, and Haru says that he saved him, which doesn't make much sense. But nonetheless, something about him really freaks Ryo out, and he spirals into a frenzy, talking about how everybody hates him and sees him as a dead weight, and then confesses that his mother can't come to save him no matter how much he begs and wants that to happen, because she's already been dead for a very long time. So then he feeds even further into his own delusion, spouting that since this must be the afterlife and he's already dead anyway, his mum must be somewhere with him, maybe even nearby. And right before his eyes, Ryo sees a faint image of his mother in the distance, which is right when the rest of the gang show up and are relieved to see he's okay. But unfortunately, that relief quickly fades and turns into a stomach-wrenching sight right before their eyes. Ryo, in a trance, walks deeper and deeper into the fog, laughing and calling for his mother, until a black shadow appears in front of him with hundreds of hands reaching out. But right now, he still sees his mother and tells her never to leave him again. She disappears, his reality is shattered, and he's pulled into the fog, kicking and screaming while blood splatters all across the screen. It's a confronting sight, and Takuma and the others are in shock and end up just heading back to the school as it's the only place any of them can feel relatively safe at this point. The next day, everyone is on edge and understandably afraid, but eventually it's decided that our next destination has to be that amusement park we saw from the top of the radio tower yesterday, where hopefully we can find Mew so she doesn't end up with the same fate as Ryo. And well, once we get there, conveniently enough, we do. She's taken over this abandoned amusement park and reigns over all the little rookie Digimon as their queen. She also has her own partner, Sycamon, by her side. But straight off the bat, Kaito reverts back into his overprotective self, and Mew is just having none of it. Of course, there is an argument for both sides here. Mew doesn't quite understand the gravity of the situation they've been put in, so it's only natural to want to help her. However, from the start, before they were ever even in another world, Kaito has been far too overbearing. So how can you expect Mew to act in any other way than to drop everyone down a secret hatch in the floor Mr. Burns style so they are out of her face? Fortunately, Digimon, the previous caretaker of the amusement park, helps us escape. But now the park is under attack. We are confronted by the attackers, Monzaimon and Garurumon. And this is what finally forces Mew to realize the situation they're in, with so many of her new monster friends just being badly hurt in the process. We fend them off, and after much deliberation within the group, decide our next course of action is to infiltrate the enemy base, as they seem to know a lot, so maybe they'll have some idea on how we can get home. Plus, we might have the advantage if we get in there and attack first, rather than sitting around and waiting to be attacked like we've done so far. Our only real lead on where their hideout might be is a doorway we saw at the bottom of the dam, which we now have a key for thanks to Digimon. Before we venture out further, we head back to the school to get some rest. And before our next chapter starts, we get a small dialogue scene, which changes depending on who your highest affinity is with. I obviously didn't know that at the time, and a lot of people going into this game might not even realize it either. But this is just another one of those small things that can change depending on the way you play the game. For me, I had a conversation with Saki in the hallway as she couldn't sleep. And in some other playthroughs I've watched, I've seen other people talk to Kaito, for example. It's just small details like this and conversations you might not ever have in your own playthrough that just really help me appreciate the experience, because it really is catered towards the way you play. And I didn't even know that Saki was my highest affinity at that point. It's just kind of the conclusion I've come to now that I've seen the variations in other gameplay. So we venture off to the dam, and tensions are running pretty high, especially between the group and Shuji. And it all comes to a boiling point when we arrive. Kaito and Drakemon suggest we leave Shuji and Lopmon behind so he can take care of Haru and Miyuki outside, because right now he doesn't seem to be in the right headspace to go into a fight, which very well could turn into another life or death scenario. Shuji overhears this, takes it quite personally, and decides to run off headfirst into the enemy base. And once we catch up to him, we fall right into another one of Arukenimon's traps. She fogs up the whole waterway, separates everyone, and creates a whole plethora of doppelgangers. These doppelgangers feed into each person's dark thoughts and try to break them. We talk to who we think is Agumon, who says to us things like us not really speaking up about the way Shuji treats Lopmon is just as bad as what he's doing in and of itself, which is honestly kind of true and is really a harsh reality to hear. We break out of this attack and slowly find other members of our group in similar situations and help them break free from it as well. We see fake Labramon poking at Aoi's dread of being useless, fake Floramon telling Saki she is a bad friend and will soon enough find herself alone again. You get the picture. We find everyone except for Shuji, who's the one we're worried about most, especially considering the kind of attack we're going through. Then when we do find Shuji, he's just standing there talking to himself, seeing delusions of monsters in the water that no one else is seeing. He runs off again and is cornered by Arukenimon, who makes him a deal. If he can offer up just one sacrifice, she'll show them how to get back to their world. He comes to the conclusion that he'll sacrifice himself, but even as he says that, he doesn't really mean it. It's not what he wants at all. And when faced with Megaseedramon, the beast tasked to take out his life, he freaks the fuck out and takes it all out on Lopmon. Shuji and Lopmon had trouble connecting right from the get-go. He always saw him as either a monster to be feared or some useless creature that couldn't do anything right, even though he never truly gave him the chance to try. He would always shut him down, demean him, make him feel bad for even caring. Lopmon's friendship and care was unconditional, and Shuji just did not even reciprocate that in the slightest. That is, until it was convenient for him. When he was backed into a corner, feeling useless and desperate, is when Shuji demanded strength from Lopmon. He pushed and tried to train him in the strictest and cruelest way, all just stemming back from the disapproval he felt from his father. He saw himself in Lopmon and his more successful brother in all of the others, with their bonds and useful monsters. So he dealt with his problems the only way he knew how, by trying to force it. And when it all came to that boiling point, with Shuji kicking and beating on Lopmon, trying to force it to evolve and become stronger like everyone else, the energy piled up inside Lopmon and burst to the surface, evolving into Wendigomon, or as I knew from the Digimon movie, Kokomon. And if you never thought this Digimon was scary like I did watching it in the movie as a child, you just might think so now, because this isn't just a kid's cartoon with boundaries anymore. Wendigomon picks up Shuji by the feet as he's kicking and screaming for his life and proceeds to eat him. Not even in one clean gulp, he makes sure to get a good crunch in as blood splatters all over the screen once again, while hearing his flesh crumple and bones crack in the background. It's fucking grim. But we don't even have a second to mourn, because as soon as Wendigomon's finished with Shuji, he sets his sight on us. We put it out of its misery with another evolution into our ultimate. For me, this point it was Metal Greymon. Once it's all over, it's hard to even be happy about the fact we overcame this obstacle and survived. Because, well, we've just witnessed another tragic death. Which leads me into something I really appreciate about this game. These two deaths of Ryo and Shuji cannot be prevented in your first playthrough of the game. So no matter what you do, you are forced to sit through the grim reality of this world through these poor souls' demise. And the game even loves to kick it in your face at the end by giving you a little title card saying if Ryo's affinity was higher, maybe everyone could have survived. Even though it literally isn't possible on your first playthrough, at least it gives you a bit of a hint and some incentive to go through to your second playthrough, where you can get a happier ending. The game has a hidden fourth route only available in New Game Plus, where everyone can in fact survive. The only downside is this game is pretty damn long, so not a lot of people are gonna actually, go through and play it a second time. So a lot of them won't ever experience the true route. But I think that slight drawback is well worth it for the guaranteed impact these two deaths will deliver. Back to our story, and it turns out the professor is alive and manages to guide us out of these dreaded tunnels we've been stuck in, off to the shore of the island that we were headed towards. But the main thing on everyone's minds is what just went down, which just leads to more internal conflict and a new distrust between everyone and their partners. I mean, we literally just saw Shuji get eaten by his. And while yes, no one else treated their partner in such a way to warrant that kind of result happening, it's understandable why these kids, these teenagers, wouldn't have that much of a level head to consider that, especially after what just happened. And now we're just wandering this new area filled with abandoned buildings, just trying to do some damage control. We generally get most of the group to come around, bar Minoru. Him and Falcomon just can't seem to get along. And the game even goes so far as to prevent us using Falcomon in any of the random encounters or battles we have because of this. Fortunately, Minoru realizes that Falcomon's feelings are a reflection of his own, exactly like Lopmon. So really, the only thing that could turn Falcomon against him is himself. He tries to apologize, but Falcomon is having none of it and just continues to run away. In other news, we find an old photo of Haru and Miyuki in one of the abandoned apartment buildings, which is really odd. Then out of nowhere, Garurumon reappears in front of Miyuki, along with Arukenimon, who he doesn't seem happy to see. And in the heat of battle, Falcomon comes back to Minoru's side. Once we fend them off, they retreat to the west, where we can see an old abandoned factory. That has to be their actual base and is our next heading. Before that though, we once again head back to the school and rest and have another late night convo with whoever in the group we're closest with at that time. The next day, before we head off to the enemy base, we meet the professor at the shrine, and he tells us about how his memory is slowly coming back to him. If you hadn't figured it out already, he is Haru, and we saw him get sent back to the real world at the beginning of the game when Miyuki sacrificed herself to protect him. Something drew him back into this world all these years later. Whether that be to rekindle his relationship with his old partner, Garurumon, or to save his sister who was left behind, we don't really know. One thing it does prove though is that it's definitely possible to get back home. This begs the question though, if the professor is Haru, then who is the little boy Haru that we've known this whole time? We'll get to that soon enough. On our journey to the enemy's base, we encounter Arukenimon once again, who this time manages to take Miyuki. Haru, the kid one, runs off to save her. So the rest of us put our asses into gear and try to catch up to him. Along the way, we start to see corpses piling up, all of servants of Arukenimon. And when we make it back to the apartment district, we find her with Arukenimon faced by Renamon. If you haven't, once again, put kind of two and two together already and missed it at the start of the game, Renamon and Garurumon were Miyuki and Haru's partners. And in Haru's absence, Renamon took the form of him to help Miyuki cope, as she lost half her soul as well as the ability to speak the day they were separated. Just by looking at the age of Haru, the professor, you can see it's clearly been a very long time. So our cloaked evil who's been lurking around in the background that I haven't really talked about much yet, and it's Piedmon, who doesn't want to take anyone's shit and straight off the bat just brutally murders Arukenimon. Then proceeds to take Miyuki for his master, and we track them down to the abandoned factory we figured they were all going to, and there Garurumon gets his chance to enact vengeance on the professor, Haru, who left him behind all those years ago. But he can't bring himself to do it. So fuck that noise. We go to try and save Miyuki. More or less fail because Piedmon's just too strong. He starts a ritual, dark clouds appear, and we can't lose another friend. So we beeline it straight to the altar she's laying on, and Takuma, Agumon, Piedmon and Miyuki disappear. We wake up in a dark void that just feels heavy to be in. Fortunately enough, we are saved by a bright light we can see in the distance. This bright light takes us to the music room in the school where we see Miyuki. She saved us and she can talk now. And we learn that her song, the one she hums every now and then, I know I didn't really mention that throughout this video so far, but I mean, look at the timeline underneath you. I can't mention every little thing each and every character does. But this song has been passed down her family, the keepers of the Kemonogami Shrine, for generations. It's what keeps the darkness at bay and allowed us to escape it into this little pocket dimension between worlds. It also has the real neat ability to bridge the gap between this world and the real one. And alas, Takuma, Agumon and Miyuki end up back in the real world, which is a very similar story beat to the original Digimon Adventure anime. And I mean, if you've watched the original Digimon Adventure, you would have noticed by now how much inspiration this story takes from that and how much homage it pays to it. Plenty of very similar story beats with a little bit more drama and an eerie bit of extra horror, which we love to see. Once we return to civilization, we find out that A, it's only been a couple of hours since we've gone missing, yet we spent about a whole week in that other world, and B, it's been about 50 years since Miyuki was sent to and trapped in that other world. Back when she was in the real world, that shrine was upkept by her family and not some abandoned, destroyed ancient ruin. And I mean, it makes sense, she's never even heard the word computer in her life. We see news headlines of more accidents and disasters happening around, coincidentally in the exact same places we were in the other world, like in the cable car ropeway and the abandoned factory just before. So it becomes clear pretty quick that what happens in the other world affects this one. And it also dawns on us that we will have to go back to that other world, not just to save our friends, to also stop these two worlds from tearing each other apart. To do that, we need to take down this master who controls the fog and has been trying to get Miyuki since the very beginning. It already has half her soul and wants to steal the rest to gain her power. Takuma has some doubts. I mean, at the end of the day, he's just a regular kid. How's he gonna go on some heroic adventure and take on the master of that world, saving this one? It's genuinely a lot to ask. Before we can process that and fully come around, we start to hear reports of some monster showing up near the shrine. Turns out, he and Mon ended up back in this world with us. We fend him off and some civilians get some, albeit crappy, photos of the action going on between us. Even in his weakened state, he is still far too strong for us. So we take the only option we've got, and Miyuki opens up a portal back to the other world with her song, and we push him in. This is where our stories truly split, and we can take the moral, wrathful, or harmonious choice up into the end. Only one of which is a happy ending, and contrary to the red color it's associated with, that happens to be the moral route. So let's tackle that first. We return, and everyone's freaking the fuck out upon seeing us because they thought we died in that fog, and it's been 10 days since we disappeared. In this time, Aoi's taken over as the leader, cooking meals for everyone, keeping them alive as well as hopeful in a sense. But now finally with us back, some of that weight can be lifted off her shoulders, and we have to explain everything we've learned. Our key hope to get back is Miyuki, but we learn that she's now been taken over near completely by the master and is trying to kill us as well as destroy everything in its path. But at the end of the day, she is our only ticket out of this world and the only way we're going to save it too. So we have to save her, which is a really hard ask considering everyone is petrified of her at the moment. Under the control of the master, she kills a whole bunch of those child Digimon that were under Miu's care. And worst of all, when we confront her at the amusement park, she kills Digimon as well. We try to, reach out to her so she can break free from the master's stranglehold, but it just doesn't work. Time after time. It's nothing but demoralizing. Our last hope, our final stretch, is to enter a newfound cave at the bottom of the shrine that's opened up. This is supposed to be the master's lair. Before our final battle, we get a cute group pic with everyone because why the hell not? We might all end up dying in this final battle anyway. And then we head deeper and deeper into the depths of this shrine. As we get closer, the gaps between worlds start to shrink. And the way we see this is by our phones starting to work. We start to get text messages come through. And it just gives us that little bit of inspiration before our final battle. We have our final fight with Garurumon coming back to the professor's side, evolving into Metal Garurumon. And our boy Agumon has evolved into War Greymon since returning to this world. So we all know what happens next. They combine and evolve into Omnimon or Omegamon and absolutely annihilate everything. Amongst the chaos, Renamon is an unfortunate casualty. she comes back as a Digi-Egg a little bit later, so it's chill. Then we go to our final battle, trapped in that dark space we saw earlier. Everyone has to go through and fight a shadow of themselves. Very Bleach of them. It's a similar concept to Arukenimon's attack from earlier, so seeing it a second time doesn't quite hit as hard, but it's still a nice concept to really test their resolve in the end. We face off with the Master in his true form, looking like Jarvis or something, and end up kicking his ass after hundreds and thousands of people start to believe in the world of the Kemonogami, all because of a viral post of our fight with Piedmon from earlier. So basically we find out the Master was trying to keep this world alive in his own horrible child sacrificial way, but there was an alternative. More people simply knowing about the world. It's like that old saying, you die twice. Once when your heart stops beating, and a second time the last time a person utters your name. Miyuki being trapped for so long and not being able to care for the shrine and spread the Kemonogami faith led to this destruction we were in, as it was being forgotten. But now, in this internet age with albeit pretty shitty proof, this world might once again be able to prosper, being in everyone's mind. Even if it's just spoken about in those, conspiracy theory YouTube videos like my fiance watches to go to bed. And that's pretty much it. We all end up going back to our own world, have a bit of a sad goodbye with all of our partners, promising we'll see them again, and get a prologue 1 year later, where Haru talks to Miyuki about how the belief of this world spreads so far online, and from now on won't just be sustained by some folklore in a small rural Japanese town. And because of that, says it'll probably end up being known as the digital world, which Miyuki officially dubs as its name, considering it never really had one before, which would then make the monsters of that world digital monsters, or Digimon. Oh, and we also see everyone kind of meet up and all happy together without Ryo and Shuji because they're dead. Now we get to our more fun and horrific ending, starting with Wrath. Things start off quite similar, but our main point of difference is Saki, as she starts to fall off the deep end. After finding out from us that time moves differently in this world compared to the real one, she almost becomes hopeful as she could live a much longer life in this one compared to back home. From the start, Saki's been hiding the fact that she's living with a deadly disease, which is slowly killing her and meaning that she will more than likely die young, which is the main reason she even wanted to go on this camping trip to begin with, so she can make a bunch of fun memories before going into her next surgery. And now death is just hitting her in the face from every angle. When we reach the amusement park and see the child Digimon dying, she sees a part of herself in them, and it absolutely breaks her heart. And our second biggest point of difference comes from Aoi. She is not anywhere near as level-headed as she was in the moral route. Instead of sharing the responsibility with you when you return, she just can't let go of that and continues to carry the weight until she inevitably snaps. Her breaking point that tips her over the edge is Saki, someone she cared deeply about, her best friend who she genuinely wanted to be more like, is torn away from her. Saki, while helping some of those kid Digimon, is grabbed by one of the Master's servants and is forcibly being dragged and pulled into the fog. Aoi grabs her and tries to pull her out with the help of Kaito and Takuma, but it's just not enough. Saki, not wanting anyone else to get hurt because of her, decides to just let go of Aoi's hand and let herself be consumed.
さきさん、私怖いけど葵ちゃんありがとう。嘘。いや、やめて。ダメ手を離さないで。
This hit me like a fucking Boeing A380, man. I swear to God. Just hearing her and Aoi's screams as she's pulled in, it's something else. It's chilling. The voice acting in this game is absolutely phenomenal, and it hits every note it has to and leaves you feeling cold and empty. With this death, being one of the most brutal in my eyes and is easily the biggest gut punch of them all. Then Floramon screams as she dies right after, solidifying the fact that Saki is truly gone. It all hurts. From this point on, Aoi spirals, blaming herself for Saki's death. She wanders off into the woods nearby the school because she just can't be with anyone right now. She's in her own head, and she happens to catch a glimpse of Haru. So she follows him up into a library that's kind of randomly popped up in these woods. She's hoping when she gets there, she can save him as some sort of redemption or getting a win after losing Saki. But when she enters this library, she doesn't find Haru there. Emerging from the darkness is Saki, which for a brief moment gives Aoi some hope. She thinks somehow maybe Saki might have survived, but that hope quickly turns into despair when this figure of Saki starts to torment her. Fortunately, she breaks free from this illusion when the rest of the gang notice she's missing and arrive at the library, but this thought still looms over her. Was Saki's death actually her fault? Could she have done something different to save her? She continues to spiral and feeds into her own delusion, saying that if everyone was like her, no one would have to die. And to achieve that, she'll make everybody one. It's a bit out of whack, but her heart's still kind of in the right place. And when she, alone once again, stumbles upon an injured Piedmon, she gets Labramon to heal him as a peace offering. But peace, for Piedmon at least, was never an option. Piedmon picks up Aoi by the neck, strangles her, and throws her into the ground, shattering her worldview once again, as well as probably her ribcage. The rest of the gang catch up to defeat Piedmon, but it's already too late. The damage had been done and the light was already starting to leave Aoi's eyes as she laid there. Labramon, pretty beaten up in and of itself, is also lying close by. But in what each of them probably thinks is their last moments, they slowly crawl to each other. That is, until Aoi's resolve kicks in. She doesn't want to die here. She refuses to die here. When Aoi and Labramon touch, they dark biomerge into Plutomon, who quickly murders Piedmon and proclaims that this was the answer Aoi is looking for all along. Her head feels clear, and with this form she can finally bring peace to the world by everyone becoming one so they can finally understand each other. Very Evangelion of her. The way she plans to do this is by stealing the Master's power so she can then control the fog and encapsulate the entire world. This form, this resolution, and this tunnel vision is all a product of the weight being put upon Aoi's shoulders, that in this wrathful route at least, nobody takes off. The choices we make to get to the wrathful route do paint Takuma in a more immature light, and not someone that Aoi can rely on like in all the other routes. And considering the fact she is also older than all of us, she doesn't see any other option but to take on all this responsibility. And after Saki's death, it was all over. Before our final confrontation, Kaito remarks on how he actually kind of agrees with Aoi's sentiment, saying that it's not like her wanting to make everybody one and understand each other is so wrong, it's just the way she's going about it, by destroying the whole world in the process. Which, while surprising, does somewhat fit his character considering his outlook on his sister Miu, and makes it all the more heartbreaking when he decides that he's the one who has to put her out of her misery and end this. But before we get the chance at the end of this final battle, she's absorbed by the Master. And a fight with the Master is where we're led, until we weaken it and suddenly Aoi breaks free, claiming to have finally absorbed the Master, absorbed everything. Double Uno reverse card there. With all of this newfound power, she endeavors to merge the two worlds into one, as well as merging everyone into one being. With our combined strength, we managed to defeat her, and despite everything, in a still somber goodbye, she's gone. But even though we won, it certainly didn't feel like it. And although we defeated Aoi, we didn't exactly stop her. The damage was already done, which means the two worlds will slowly collide, and our battle is hardly over. Cutting to a year later, everything turned out exactly as Aoi described. The worlds combined and no more sacrifices were necessary to sustain the world of the Kemonogami. But the Kemonogami themselves started to bleed into the human world in droves. And as you'd expect, not everyone who partnered up with these monsters had good intentions, and neither did some of the monsters themselves, so the whole world spiraled into chaos. A vast majority of the population never actually even met their destined partner, so the ones that did had an extreme power over everyone else that didn't, which ended up creating a divide and prejudice in the world. A vast majority who didn't have partners feared those who did. They tried to capture them and lock them away, hoping the world would eventually just forget about them, which further drove this resentment and divide. It's a dystopian hellscape. Kids with their partners are assaulted by police officers in the street. And finally, we see Kaito and Takuma, vigilantes of this new world, rescuing one of those very kids being assaulted and taking him back to their larger group, who are revolting against the government order and helping other kids like this one who just really don't know what even is going on in the first place, because they never wanted to see another kid and their partner fall off the deep end like their old friend Aoi, as they are well aware of how tragic the consequences can be. And it all wraps up with a sentiment share between Kaito and Takuma. They won't stop fighting until they can actually create the world Aoi envisioned, where everyone can understand each other. Just not by her means. And finally, we come to the harmonious ending, which definitely isn't as harmonious or happy as its green association insinuates. All of those years of Star Wars color theory down the drain. Again, similar starting premise, we return to the world of the Kemonogami and meet back with our friends where we have to explain everything. This route, however, runs parallel to the Wrathful one. We get similar story beats, but with different characters and opposite motives. You'll start to see it develop, but more on that later. We head to the amusement park, find the many dying child Digimon and try to save as many of them as we can, while fending off the possessed Miyuki and the Master's servants. Just before we all regroup and are ready to get the hell out of there, we learn that Kaito and Miu are still off somewhere fighting. So we let everyone else stick together while we alone go back to find them, promising Saki before we leave that we'll bring them both back. But I'm sure, as you can imagine by now, that won't pan out the way we want it to. Kaito and Miu are facing down a shit ton of the Master's servants, and Miu tells him, hey, I think it's time to, pack the fuck up and get out of here. But Kaito knows this amusement park is important to Miu. It was once her personal kingdom after all, so he decides he knows what she wants and tells her he's gonna fight back to protect this place. The thing is, that just isn't what Miu wants at all. She doesn't want him to fight, and especially not for her sake. And this stubbornness, thinking he always knows what's best for her, and always choosing violence as his outlet, ends up being his downfall. The two are quickly surrounded and overwhelmed, but fortunately enough, are bailed out by Takuma when he arrives. Kaito starts to realize that he should be seeing things from Miu's perspective more often, rather than just casting her in shadow, ignoring her, and thinking he knows what's best for her. And the cruel irony is, as soon as he learns this, she's stripped away from him. Miu hears a voice calling for help, so she quickly runs off to check it out, with Kaito and Takuma running as close behind as they can. And in a split second, the one time Kaito was vulnerable, doubting himself and letting Miu kind of go off on her own, is when she is swallowed by the fog. Unlike any other death in this game, this one is instant. It's hard to believe it even happens. 1 second she's there and the next she's gone. No screams, no one even having a chance to help. Just one lone shot of her being dragged into the fog. Kaito freezes up and can't even force himself to run into the fog to try and save her. Within seconds, Syakomon is gone too. This event understandably sends Kaito backwards. Rather than learning from his past mistakes, he instead just decides to double down on them, telling himself he needs more power. If he was stronger, he wouldn't have froze up like that and he could have saved Miu, even though that situation was always hopeless. The next day is another wreck. Everyone is mourning for Miu except for Kaito, at least not in a conventional way. He's clearly in shock, is angry, and is also bottling everything up. The guy hasn't even shed a single tear at the loss of his sister. Similarly to Wrath, the one who's lost wanders off and finds Haru in the woods. But this time he talks to Kaito and offers him a way to get revenge on the master, who took his sister away from him. He leads Kaito to the library, and once inside, he is faced with an image of Miu, who torments him, telling him that he is a coward, that only cares about himself and couldn't even save her like he said he would. Miu didn't matter to him at all. She was only an excuse for him to fight. Kaito, even knowing this is an illusion, ends up clearing his conscience and agreeing. They're right after all, he couldn't save her. And it's not fair that he's the only one who gets to go home now. After breaking free from the illusion and beating Renamon with the gang once they show up, Kaito runs off again, acting like everyone else is soft because they didn't agree with him wanting to kill Renamon then and there. He's still pissed about being led into a trap, but tells himself at least Renamon gave him a pretty great idea. Revenge. He swears he will get revenge on the bastards that took Miu and on the jerks who couldn't help save her, shifting the blame onto everyone else and saying he will kill them all. We get into a flashback of Kaito and Miu and learn a bit more about their relationship and why he was always so overprotective in the first place. Miu had a stalker who claimed to be dating her. Kaito beat the guy half to death and he ended up being arrested. From Miu's perspective after this, she saw her parents almost believing the stalker to some capacity, acting like she did something wrong, as if she led him on, essentially victim blaming an 11-year-old. And now to top everything off, she's got Kaito on her back being even more overprotective than usual. She feels trapped from all angles and just wants to be set free. And from Kaito's side, he couldn't grasp why Miu even stopped him in the first place, and why his parents were looking at him as if he was the villain. Nobody else did anything to help her, and this guy was spreading rumors and stalking Miu. He had to do something, but when he did, suddenly he's the bad guy. Would they rather have seen her hurt? They moved to the countryside to just get away from it all, and as if Miu didn't feel trapped enough already, now she's being bullied in school too. And once again, Kaito learns of this, steps in and beats up the kid to try and save the day, which just isn't what Miu wanted at all. And in this memory Kaito has, her voice echoes in his head. You just want an excuse to be violent. Kaito alone starts to indiscriminately beat up any and every monster in his way, saying that they are all at fault for Miu's death. He says he needs to kill every last one of them to avenge her. He's spiraling, and even his partner, Drakemon, is questioning his decisions. He's been worried about him and the way he's going for some time now, but at this point it's getting to be a bit much. It reminds me to an extent of another blonde boy, Dimitri from Fire Emblem Three Houses. He also sought a path of vengeance, craving violence like a wild boar, wanting to pay the dead their tributes until he spiraled so far and lost himself completely, all the way up until his death. Kaito, falling down a similar path, stumbles upon Piedmon, who overheard him and asks him if killing everyone is really what he wants, and if it is, offers him the power he seeks. Piedmon is badly injured and will probably die soon, but doesn't want that. He wants revenge on the master who used him as a pawn. So he tells Kaito that he can merge with Drakemon's evolved form, Moistmon, to become a being that is powerful enough to fulfill Kaito's wish, and destroy both worlds that offered Miu nothing but pain. Kaito has to get his revenge. He can't see any other way. And to Drakemon's despair, he lets this happen. The image of the two facing each other, with Drakemon saying to Kaito, "You can't be serious," is just heartbreaking. He's just watched his destined partner fall off the deep end and make the worst mistake of his life. But he knows it's what his heart truly wants and can't do anything to stop him. With his final words to Kaito as himself being, "You and me, we were like brothers, weren't we?" Kaito thanks him before he combines with Piedmon to become Bolt Boutermon. From here on out, everyone is his enemy and he will use Bolt Boutermon's power to destroy the world. When we find him and see what he's done, he indiscriminately beats us the hell up, but lets us live in order to go and fight the Master at full strength. Which leads us once again into our final battle underneath the shrine, where we find piles of corpses of the Master's servants, as well as, of course, Kaito and Bolt Boutermon. Everyone tries to convince Kaito to just stop this, but their words aren't enough to reach him. At this point in time, he's completely set on his path for vengeance, going so far as to say, "We failed Mew, and he's going to kill us for that." However, once we finally manage to best him, we knock a sliver of sense back into the guy, with Aoi saying if he really cared about Mew and wanted to honor her, he should move forward and protect what she left behind rather than try to just destroy it all. And Kaito breaks down, realizing he was just about to destroy everything Mew ever held dear in the first place. So he backs down, but it's too late to turn back. Bolt Boutermon was born from his hatred, his vengeance, and his longing to destroy the world in his darkest hour. Once Kaito's resolve weakens, he loses control, and Piedmon is free to take over that fusion, now acting on his own accord with that burning hatred still festering inside him. He takes Miyuki to try and steal her power, and in an act of redemption, Kaito tries to stop him. And even with the professor's help alongside him, Bolt Boutermon absorbs the three of them. He goes off to now face the Master, and we follow quickly behind. Similarly to Wrath once again, Bolt Boutermon gets absorbed by the Master until we weaken him, in where he comes back and takes control. We defeat him, but the damage is already done. And while the worlds won't be destroyed like he envisioned, they will collide. The rest of us, those who have survived, jump back through the portal to our world. And we cut to a year later, with an ending similarly prejudiced, but not as dystopian as the Wrathful one was. The game team up with the Japanese Institute of Electronic Symbiotes to help more people understand the Kemonogami and try to mitigate the hate that they're associated with. But of course, there are consequences to this. In an attempt not to let anyone else fall off the deep end and end up like Kaito, they treat those who have Kemonogami partners as special, which only goes to further broaden the divide. It's a tough balancing act, and Takuma says he's worried about the future, but he will continue to fight in the only way he knows how to try and create a better world. This, in my eyes, is probably the weakest ending. While I get where they're going with this, and I do appreciate how it is a direct parallel to the Wrathful route, because within Wrath, you're fighting Aoi, whose goal is harmony. Within the Harmony route, you're fighting Kaito, whose main goal is Wrathful, it's destruction. But I just didn't really like the approach of Kaito kind of flip-flopping between his ideals. And from the start, even after going through the trauma of losing Mew and seeing his backstory, I couldn't really see it in his character to want to indiscriminately kill everyone with no remorse. He was always conflicted, which is why he came back around in the end. But in contrast to that, I much preferred the way they stuck to their guns with Aoi in the Wrathful route, having her slowly get more progressively mad as the story went on, before absolutely losing it by the end. The only way they could really counteract this is with a drastic change in his backstory, focusing more on his violent tendencies, with Mew being the one who grounds him, rather than him occasionally using her as a way to enact violence. Oh, and I mean, come on, Wrathful's clearly more cool by the end. You get to be vigilantes and fight the New World Order rather than peacefully try to do scientific experiments and make people trust you through what? BuzzFeed articles or something? I don't know what they do. And finally, the true ending is something I'm gonna leave off the table. Not to say it isn't a good route, but personally, I feel like it's the weakest next to Harmony. It avoids the crushing realities the game makes you go through on your first playthrough, and I just think it's all the worse for it. And being the true route, it's pretty self-explanatory kind of what goes on. Happy ending where everyone gets to survive. I mean, there is more to it than that, and it does feature some cool exclusive Digimon only to that route, but yeah, this video is long enough. You can go off and experience it for yourself. Overall, Digimon Survive is a fantastic visual novel with a great story to tell if you have the patience to let it fully engross you. It's a pretty typical Digimon formula, and even a lot of the characters and tropes pay homage to the original Digimon Adventure anime. But that's by no means a complaint, I absolutely love that. In a way, it's a more dramatic retelling, answering so many what-if questions fans might have had from the original series, considering in this one we get multiple endings to explore. And in another way, it's just simply a love letter to the series that started it all. I've only played a couple of Digimon games and watched a handful of the Digimon anime series, so I'll admit right here, I'm not the biggest Digimon fan in the world. But nonetheless, this game is an experience that stuck with me. We got to sit in the driver's seat on what could be a fully fledged Digimon anime, and I am so glad it finally escaped development hell and was released for the world to enjoy. Thank you so much for watching all the way through. I know this was an extremely long one, but I hope you enjoyed it. Let me know what you think in the comments below and have a great rest of your day.